Welcome back to the Pistons Jack YouTube channel. On today's episode, we'll be reacting to ESPN's NBA Future Power Rankings article. We'll talk about where the Pistons are ranked and why I think they're disrespected. We'll get to that in just a moment. Earlier today, ESPN dropped their annual article, which ranks all 30 teams based on the potential of their future from 1 to 30. We'll get into where the Pistons were ranked, but before we do, I think it's worth quickly going over how these rankings are justified. So essentially, I think there was 3 journalists who cover the NBA. Bobby Marks, who's kind of the salary cap, front office expert. Tim Bontemps, who covers a lot of the East Coast teams nationally. And there was also Kevin Pelton, who's like another analytics type journalist who covers the NBA at large. They were asked to rank all 30 teams in 5 categories. So they had to rank all 30 teams based on their roster, and that comes under the category of players. The second category was money, which is to do with their future cap and how they look. Draft, that is based on future draft assets, what they have in the cupboard. If it's a low ranking, it's because they owe future picks to other teams. If it's a high ranking, they probably have additional. Market, so that's based on where the team's situated, how desirable that market is in that city. And then management, so that's obviously the front office. So to jump straight to it, the Pistons came out at number 18, which, as you can see on the right here, they did jump 11 spots from 29th this time last year, which shouldn't be a surprise considering how bad they were. But having the 18th best future outlook, that doesn't sit right. That doesn't seem right. Now, before we kind of pull this apart and I go into why I think this is wrong, I think it's worth showing a bit more context and discussing a bit more context. So what I did was, and as you can see on the right here, I've listed some of the other teams in the East and where they were ranked. So like you can see here, Detroit ranked 8th in the East in terms of future outlook, and notably behind the Orlando Magic, who was 7th, the Atlanta Hawks, who were 12th, and the Miami Heat were 14th. The other 4 teams that were ahead of the Pistons were the Knicks and Cavs, which shouldn't be a surprise, they're in the top 5. And then the Celtics and Pacers were a few spots ahead. The Celtics were 13th and the Pacers ranked 15th. Now, I could make an argument for the Pacers at 15th that they're slightly ahead, but they could have easily won a championship. Well, there's a chance they could have won a championship if Halliburton doesn't injure his Achilles. And then the Celtics, even though their rosters changed quite dramatically and their star players coming off a ruptured Achilles and will be out, they won a championship just over a year ago. So I don't think I can sit here and say the Pistons, should be higher than them. So I wanted to talk about these 3 teams here. The Magic, I understand. I don't think I need to go into that too much. I just wanted to cite them because they've been on a similar timeline to the Pistons with their rebuild. And I think it can just show they went all in on a move for Desmond Bane this season, which has probably taken them from around the 10 to 15 range or 12 to 15 range up to 7th. They're obviously projecting that will be a really good move. And I mean, on paper, it should be a seamless fit that addresses a lot of their issues. But the 2 teams here I really took issue with were the Hawks and Heat. Now let's do the Hawks quickly because I don't think this one is as bad. But to have the Hawks 6 spots ahead of the Pistons, I wanted to look into each of the categories that we listed off the top and see where they ranked compared to the Pistons. So on the right here, you can see where the Pistons ranked in each major category. I'm going to read out where the Hawks were ranked. And we'll do this with the Heat as well briefly. So in terms of roster or players, they have the Hawks at 14. And as you can see here, the Pistons were 17th. Look, it is pretty close. I think it's more of a reflection on how low the Pistons are, to be honest. I think the Hawks having the 14th best roster sounds about right. Trae Young is an all-star type player, but if Jalen Johnson can take a big-time leap, maybe he's their star player. But there's not a lot of... There's no one like Cade on that roster. Now, the thing I couldn't find here in the article is if they're looking at rosters based on what they are as of today right now, or they're projecting a little bit into the future, because if you're projecting a little bit into the future, I think the Pistons being at 17th is wrong, flat out wrong. Cade's already an all-NBA player. should have been All-NBA second, finished 7th in MVP last year. You have Ausar Thompson, who could very well be due for an Amen type leap this year. Maybe not the offensive juice, but in terms of like being able to play 30 minutes a night, being on ball more, being an absolute defensive menace in a number of games, like I think Ausar is a pretty safe bet to take a big leap this season. You have Jaden Ivey, you have Ron Holland, who I think the league's sleeping on, but hopefully this season he can show a little bit more. So if there's no projection for potential, I can see why the Pistons are 17th and the Hawks are 14th, but I still think without projecting into the future, 17th just doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, moving on, in terms of cap space and financial flexibility, the Pistons are ranked 8th. They are set up very well for the future to make big moves and don't owe any big money apart from Cade. The Hawks are ranked 9th, so they're in a good spot too. So far, pretty even. Draft. Now, this is where there's some separation comes. The Pistons have all their picks, but they don't really have any future firsts, or they don't. They might have a couple of future seconds, but the Hawks here have a ranking of 7. So they've got future picks. I think they got them from the Pelicans as part of that deal for DeJounte Murray. So that's one separator there. Market, this is another big one. Atlanta's ranked 11th, best market. The Pistons obviously 25th. I'll leave that to everyone in the comments to discuss, as don't live in the US and don't fully understand market sizes outside of like the obvious of LA, New York, and that kind of thing. And then this is the one where I disagree the most. Pistons ranked 18th in management, and the Hawks were 11th. Now, the Hawks have had some changeover in their front office, and they had a really good offseason this past offseason. We'll see how the Porzingis things works out, but I can see why people have them as one of the winners. Pistons been 18th. Are we sure? Are we sure this new front office is the 18th best? This is a front office that added shooting last season, that added the pieces necessary to help this team go from 14 wins to 44 and take the Knicks to 6 games. They added Dennis Schroeder at the deadline, a huge key piece who made massive shots in the playoffs for nothing. They didn't give up players. They kept a free roster spot all last season to ensure they could make that move. Now, they got a trade a player exception for Schroeder at this offseason. Maybe if they had got Malik Monk, they get more marks here, but I don't necessarily think they should be taking on Monk in a big deal. Trajan's trying to keep the cap kind of open to make a big move when the time's right. The Duncan Robinson deal looks really good now that we have the full context on that deal, that it's pretty much a 1-year deal with partial and no guarantees in the second and third years. You signed Karis LeVert to a mid-level 2-year deal that will be very tradable, definitely after this season, and I expect him to contribute. So I'm not sure about the 11 to 18th gap here, but nonetheless, that and the draft is the main thing that separates these two. So look, the Hawks being ahead of them isn't the issue. I think that it's more about the Pistons here being undervalued in some certain spots. Now let's talk about the one here that frustrates me the most. Miami Heat have the 14th best future outlook, 4 spots ahead of the Pistons. Like, what are we doing here? Let's just quickly go through these and then I'll share my opinion. So, the Miami Heat, in terms of players, have the 18th best roster. The Pistons are 17th. We've discussed that. I think the Pistons should be ahead of them, probably ahead by a bit more. Tyler Hero and Bam, both All-Stars. Bam, I think, has got to prove that he can get back to that All-NBA level, because he wasn't that last season. So we shall see. But I think Miami being at 18th isn't an issue. I think it's more about the Pistons roster being undervalued at 17th. Money, Miami have the 10th best outlook, Pistons 8th. Draft, the Miami are at 19th, the Pistons are at 13th. Now, that's because they owe some picks. Market size, this is a big difference again. The Heat are ranked 5th and Detroit are 25th. And then management, Miami are at 3rd and Detroit are at 18th. So the reason the Heat are ahead is because of market and management. And they have quite sizable advantages there. I'm just not sure. I understand why market's on here, and I understand why it is a contributing factor. But are we sure it's as big of a draw card these days? Like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head who have the Heat kind of acquired. There's a lot of rumors always that they're interested in Dame. They were interested in Giannis. They're interested in KD. But they never seem to really get that guy. They got Jimmy in 2019. and they drafted Bam, they drafted Hero. They obviously get buyout guys here and there, but I don't know if that should be as heavily weighted to the point where they're essentially 4 spots ahead of Detroit in terms of future outlook. Same with management. Now, I think the Heat's management has been really good, but is management factoring in coaching? Because if it's coaching, then I get why they're top 3. Are we sure their management's been incredible? I don't know. But I do know, like I said, the Pistons should be 18th. And certainly I think the way some of these things are weighted doesn't add up to the Pistons having a worse future outlook than the Heat. I think the Pistons roster and management has been significantly underrated on this list. Like when I think of young cores and some of the outlooks on these teams, like I don't think the Pistons have the 17th best roster, and I certainly don't think they have the 18th best front office. Now, maybe they're saying, well, Langdon and his new front office hasn't had to make any major moves, but they haven't really stuffed anything up. And I know it's only been 12 months, but yeah, not sure. You let me know in the comments. Maybe like I'm too biased here and haven't scoped the league enough, but I don't think the Heat should have a better future outlook than the Pistons, full stop. And then I think the Hawks being 6 spot ahead is kind of a miss for me. But overall, like I said, the Pistons were the 8th best future in the East per ESPN, or they have the 8th best future in the East, and they finished 18th. Let me know in the comments. Is this disrespect? Is this wrong? I will say they did cite in there that maybe, like I think Kevin Pelton wrote the blurb for the Pistons. He cited that maybe the Pistons should be a bit higher, but he wants to see them win 44 games or more again. I can kind of get that, but like, yeah, we shall see. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But until next time, as always, go Pistons.